Welcome to Literary AF Podcast.
Hello and welcome to Literary AF Podcast. My name is Sheldon.
I'm Danny.
And today we have our very first sponsor.
Oh.
There was an Italian priest on the side of the road
Oh, no.
who offered me a giant diamond as long as I talked about Count of Monte Cristo Part 3.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and then this other guy who was like an English gentleman.
Yeah.
But he kind of looked a lot like the Italian priest. Well, he came up to me and he said he'd give me 50,000 livres if I talked about Count of Monte Cristo Part 3.
Oh, I see.
And then a mysterious sailor who called himself Sinbad the Sailor
Oh, no.
offered me riches beyond my wildest dreams if I talked about Count of Monte Sailor.
Count of Monte Sailor.
Oh, I tried so hard.
Oh.
Dang it. Well, let's restart. Hi, welcome to Literary AF Podcast. I messed up the podcast now. All right, one more time. Hello, welcome to Literary AF Podcast. My name is Sheldon.
I'm Danny.
And we're talking about Count of Monte Cristo Part 3. That wasn't a real sponsor. It was an inside joke about the book, you guys. Come on. Yeah, so how's it going?
It's going, you know.
Oh, yeah.
How's it going?
My sock is really wet right now.
Oh, no.
And I'm very distracted by my wet sock.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Do you need to take a minute to go change your sock?
No, I'll power through.
All right.
So this so I'll try to say this section, but I got distracted by my own words. This is going to be a bit of a doozy today, because, like, there's a lot of things that are happening, but none of the subplots have, like, clear endings or clear, like,
Yeah.
whatever, so it's like, we're kind of just in the middle of various subplots.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of characters, and I thought what I might do to start off is just kind of break down the characters and how they fit into relationship to each other.
Okay.
But also, just as a very brief thing, hopefully you've listened to Part 1 and Part 2 of Count of Monte Cristo before this. Otherwise, a lot of this won't make sense.
Most of it will not make sense.
Just a brief summary. Edmond Dante was about to marry the love of his life, Mercedes, when he was framed for a crime by three men, Danglars, Monsieur Danglars, Ferdinand, I can never remember, and then the attorney was Monsieur Villefort, or Villefort.
Villefort.
If you want to read it in English. Anyway, these three guys framed him. He was in prison for a long time. While in prison, he learned about a treasure. And he eventually escaped after, I think it was like 14 or 19 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
He went and found his treasure on the island of Monte Cristo. Then he disappeared then the book kind of ignores him for like 10 years, just skips ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And then now he's like super rich, and he no longer goes by the name Edmond Dante. He's now just the Count of Monte Cristo.
Mm-hmm.
And he is trying to get revenge on the three men who wronged him. Yeah, that's kind of...
All right.
That's kind of what we've got so far.
Solid revenge plot. Yep.
Yep. So just to kind of go through the characters, because a lot of the characters are interconnected, and a lot of it is like jumping back and forth, and I feel like it'd be easier if I just kind of set them up now.
Right.
Okay, so you have Count of Monte Cristo, obviously, and he wants revenge on three men, which is Baron Danglars now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Count Morcerf, who used to go by the name of Ferdinand, I can never remember. And then Monsieur Villefort, who is the crown prosecutor.
Okay.
They're all very rich men. They're all very high rank in society. These three guys are kind of, or like their families are like the ones who are like kind of sort of running Paris right now.
Mm-hmm.
No, there's other people too, but just these are the ones that are focused on in the book, and they're all high-ranking members of society. Earlier, the Count had met two young men, one by the name of Albert and one by the name of Franz, when he was in Rome. Albert's the one who's kind of helping him meet people throughout society. Albert is also the son of Fernand and Mercedes. Mercedes was his former fiance.
Yeah, his former fiance, right?
Also, there is Maximilian Morel, who is the son of the only man who was really nice to Dante before he was thrown in prison.
Mm.
So Maximilian Morel plays a big part in this. He he is in love with Valentine Villefort, who is the daughter of Villefort's first wife.
Okay.
Villefort's first wife died, and he married a second woman who's just called Madame de Villefort. She has a son named Edward, and her and her son are both awful.
Okay.
Their son is just like a little like mischievous brat,
Right.
who's constantly getting his way, and the mom is like, I don't know, it's like she's young and married into money and doesn't really...
She does. Okay, yeah, she doesn't really care.
Doesn't really care. She just like likes the money, and also she does not like Valentine. Valentine, or it might be Valentine, I don't know. I feel like Valentine is more French.
Mm-hmm.
She also has a grandfather named Monsieur Noirtier. I don't know how to pronounce it. He is paralyzed and can only communicate through blinking, but he kind of looks out for her and she takes care of him, and so she can understand him very well. But many of the other characters in the book don't.
Right.
This is Villefort's father. He was also like connected. This grandfather was also connected to Napoleon, which is Villefort tries to hide because now they're in the royalist period and having connections to Napoleon is not kosher or whatever.
Right. Is this before his second attempt or after? Because Napoleon tried twice, right?
Yes, the second attempt happens at the beginning of this book.
Okay.
And is shut down.
Okay.
So now it's like years later.
Okay.
So it's died down, the whole competition thing.
Right.
But while Villefort was vying for power, that's when it mattered.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
So Valentine's in love with Max Morel.
Mm-hmm.
But her father has arranged a marriage between her and Franz, who we met earlier in Rome. Franz is the son of a royalist general who Valentine's grandfather hated. Who, well, spoiler alert, it's not a huge spoiler because I feel like it's at the beginning of the book, but Franz's father was killed by a royalist, or by a Napoleon assassin,
Mm-hmm.
and the grandfather was that assassin. That's revealed at the end of today's part, but it's also, I'm pretty sure it happens at the very beginning of the book as well.
Okay.
So that's the Villefort side of the family, or side of the characters. Mercedes and Fernand, but he doesn't go by Fernand, he goes by Count Morcerf. They have a son named Albert, who we've already talked about. Albert's engaged to Eugenie Danglars, who is the daughter of the Danglars family. He does not want to marry Eugenie. He thinks Eugenie is pretty in a mannish sort of way, which I'm pretty sure that's a direct quote.
Mm.
But he would rather have her for a mistress than a wife, which the Count of Monte Cristo mocks him for saying that. Then you have the Danglars family, which is Baron Danglars or whatever. He's the guy that the Count wants revenge on. His wife is really rude to him, like, constantly.
Right.
And she's always having affairs and, like, not hiding it at all. Or at least Danglars can, like, very easily see through the attempted hiding. Danglars' deal, though, is he's, like, very rich and very, like, he's constantly, like, gambling on the stock market and stuff, on the exchange. And he doesn't really care that his wife's having affairs as long as it doesn't cost him money. So the man she's having an affair with is a friend of Albert and Franz and Morel. I think they're all kind of in the same group. His name is Debray, Lucien Debray. He comes up a few times.
Mm.
And I think that's all the main characters. But, oh no, there's one more, but we're going to introduce him as we go. Okay, so that's kind of like the web of characters that come up a lot in this.
It's a huge tree. Like, that's like, I would need a spreadsheet to keep track of everybody.
Yeah, like there's 3 families, and they all have weird interconnections and stuff. The thing is, throughout, like, 600 pages, you get to know them all, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little easier than on the podcast, but yeah.
Where you only have like 5 minutes to just list all these names off and
exactly,
hope that you can remember them. Yeah.
So anyway, last time we left, the Count went to Max Morel's house with his family, and he was like touched because they were talking about their father and about a young man that his father loved called Edmond Dante, and the Count like could barely hide his tears and had to leave. After the meeting, Morel goes to visit his love, which is Valentine Villefort. She's introduced. I think that's the first time she shows up is at this meeting. He like goes to her back garden and talks to her through the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Because her father's arranged a marriage with another man. It's like they're not allowed to be together at all. But she's like 19 or something. So like she's still young enough that her father is like controlling her.
Yeah.
But like still an adult, so it's not like creepy. So Morel's flirting with her. They're always like lamenting, like, oh, what are we gonna do? This is a big subplot throughout this section of the book. Is just Morel and Valentine always trying to be together.
Mm-hmm.
This is also where you find out that she's supposed to be married to Franz, who we met earlier. Morel is poor and Franz is like richer, but Max Morel is not like super poor. He's just like a lot poorer than she is.
Right.
Anyway, their meeting gets cut short when the Count of Monte Cristo comes to the Villefort home, and then her family comes out to get Valentine to present her, like to introduce her kind of thing. While they're in the Villefort home, Edward is being a little brat, and the Count is mostly talking to Madame de Villefort, the stepmom.
Mm-hmm.
She's like very interested in the Count's knowledge of chemistry because he was able to revive her son earlier in part 2. There was like an accident with the horses and her son had fainted.
Oh yeah.
And then he put like a little drop of liquid on his lips and he revived.
Right.
So she's like curious about all these stuff, and the Count is like giving little hints about basically that this potion is like a cure in small doses, but in large doses it's poison.
Right.
And he's I believe he even gives her some just in case. But basically he's getting this idea planted in her mind about poison.
Okay.
Which may or may not come up later. Wink. Sorry, I'm just kind of skipping around here. I'm following a chapter summary because there's a lot that happens and I don't really remember like in what order everything happens. Okay, they go to the opera. That's right. So this is something that is hinted at but has not come to fruition yet from where I'm reading.
Okay.
But they go to the opera, and while at the opera, Monte Cristo, he's there with his Greek princess, Haiti, and everyone thinks she's the most beautiful woman, and he's just like, oh, that's my slave.
Oh.
He bought her from a Greek gentleman.
Oh.
I'm sure there's more to the story that hasn't been explained yet, but he refuses to call her his mistress or his wife or anything. He always just refers to her as a slave. And they have a very chaste relationship.
Right.
But anyway, he goes with her, and while she's there, she sees somebody and she nearly faints. When the Count revives her, she says, that's the man who betrayed my father, who is a Greek lord or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then the man she was pointing at was Morcerf or Fernand. And this chapter summary has just said Fernand, so I know it's not Ferdinand. But anyway, so that's the man who apparently betrayed her father, which I'm sure will come up later. There's the young, like, Albert Morcerf and a few others come and they talk about how he doesn't want to get married to... They come to visit Monte Cristo and talk about how he doesn't want to get married to Eugenie. And then here, Debray is also with them, and Debray is the man who's having an affair with Madame Danglars.
Right.
And he reveals that she likes to gamble large sums of her husband's money on the stocks.
Okay.
And also that she gets a lot of inside information from Lucien Debray because he works as like a government official. So if he knows that, say, there's trouble in the Spanish market or whatever, trouble in the Spanish government, that he should sell all his Spanish stocks.
Right.
And so that kind of gives Monte Cristo a bit of an idea. I'm just going to do it in terms of subplots rather than just trying to follow the exact order.
Yeah, that's probably for the best.
So far in part 3, you have the Danglars subplot, which is he finds out this information about the madam gambling the money, and there's also the affair. He goes to... Oh, jeez. I just remembered that a lot of them are interconnected. Whatever. Okay. So I'll tell you the money side of it, and then I'll tell you the madam side of it after. So what the Count does is he goes to a telegraph station, but not the one in the city. He goes to one like out in the country, and I guess the way the telegraph used to work is like they would send signals through lights, which were like got relayed down.
Okay, yeah.
So he went to like one of the remote stations, and then he offered the guy working there. He was like, "What happens if you relay the wrong signal?" And the guy's like, "Oh, I would be charged a fine of 1,000 francs or whatever." And then the Count was like, "Oh, well, what if I give you 40,000 francs to let me send the next signal?" And basically buys the guy off.
Right.
And the signal that the Count sends is that some Spanish person who was like sent into exile has escaped and is returning, and basically that the Spanish stock market or whatever is crashing. So he sends this fake signal, and then sure enough, Lucien Debray tells Madame Danglars, and Danglars sells all of his Spanish stocks, and he's out like 700,000 francs or something, and then the very next day it's printed in the newspaper that this telegram was a miss, or like a wrong signal was sent or something like that. So basically the Spanish stock market is fine, and everyone who sold lost a lot of money. So Danglars is out like 700,000. Then throughout the course of this whole section of the book, every time he meets with the Count will just like drop this news of like, "Oh, I hear that this bank in this area just went bankrupt," and then Danglars will be like, "What? But I just had 500,000 invested in them."
Whoops.
And the Count's like, "Well, hopefully you didn't sign the paper." And he's like, "I did this morning." The Count is like, "Oh, too bad." So he's constantly doing this to Danglars. He also sets up this other thing that is really gonna... I can't wait to see how it pays off, because it's gonna be good. And I'll explain that in a little bit. Right now, I think I have to talk about the Catholic Aunties, because this is a subplot that kind of affects all the other subplots. So, earlier in the story, there was that one servant who was like, when the Count bought the house out in the country, the servant was like, "Why did you buy this house? A man was murdered here. He was carrying a baby and was trying to bury this baby, and I stabbed the man, and then I kept the baby for my own." Do you remember that?
Wait, what?
The whole the servant was telling the story about how like the Count's new house that he bought out in the country was the site of a murder, and he knows because he was the murderer.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in that story, you find out about a young kid named Benedetto. Benedetto is like this little criminal. He's a little jerk. He is Villefort's illegitimate son.
Okay.
His bastard child.
Okay.
And I use bastard in both senses of the word. He's awful.
All right.
So they name him Benedetto.
Benedetto?
Benedetto, because they're Italian.
Oh, okay.
I think it's an Italian name. I don't know.
I've never heard it, and I'm Italian, but okay.
Well, it's like 18th century Italian.
All right, that's fair. That's valid.
So then this kid like betrays his adopted mother and like basically gets her killed, and he's just like a huge, awful little criminal child.
Right. He's a child.
Yeah, but he's like worse. He's like problem child, or like the Omen. Like
okay.
He's a little demon.
He's a little demon child. Got it.
So anyway, that's important because the Count finds out about this and kind of like notes, and then mysteriously he's expecting the arrival of Major Cavalcante, who is this Italian general. The guy, this random old guy, shows up wearing a jacket that doesn't fit him, and he's like, "I was told by an Abbe Busani, who is one of the Count's many aliases, to come here to present myself to the Count of Monte Cristo. And he's like, oh, you must be Major Cavalcanti. And the guy's like, yeah, sure. And then the Count's like, oh, well, then you must be expecting your $40,000 or whatever. And the guy's like, yeah, definitely. And then the Count's like, well, where's your son? And the guy's like, I'm not sure. And then the Count is like, oh, here he comes. He's arriving. And then this other guy shows up who, I don't know if they ever say directly it's Benedetto. I think they might a little bit later.
Right.
But it's kind of clear right from the start that this is like a little criminal kid who kind of, like, it's Benedetto. So this kid shows up and he's like, yeah, I was told by Abbe Busane or Lord Wilmore, one of the Count's identities. I was told to present myself to Count of Monte Cristo to meet my father. And then he's like, oh, you must be Andrea Cavalcante. And then the kid's like, yeah, sure. And he's like, well, here's your father here, and I have a whole bunch of money for you. And the kid's like, yeah, definitely then. While they're, so then he's like, I'm going to leave you guys to catch up. And then the Count goes and hides in the other room. And then the two have a conversation where they're like, yo, I'm not Cavalcante. And he's like, yeah, neither am I. And then he's like, so what are we doing here? And he's like, I don't know. I was told I get 50,000 if I came here and pretended to be a major. And then, of course, they think they're like pulling one over on the Count. Yeah. But they don't know that the Count is also the Abbe and also Lord Wilmore. Yeah. So these two Cavalcantes are like trying to do their thing. The Count comes out and he's like, listen, the father, you're only here for 2 weeks and then you have to go back to Italy. And the old guy's like, okay. But you're still going to get your $40,000 or francs. And then for Andrea, he's like, you have to stay in Paris and say you're looking for a wife. But he doesn't say it directly to them. He's like, just like implies that this is the only way they're going to get their money is if they do this. Right. And so then he has a party. He has a party at his country estate, the country home where the servant stabbed Villefort and stole his illegitimate child. He invites everyone. He invites the Villeforts, he invites the Danglars, and he invites the Morcerfs. But the Morcerfs can't come. Mercedes is not feeling well. And the Count is really weird around Mercedes, like every time they meet. And so he's like okay with them not coming for this event. But then he invites he invites all the main characters that I listed off in the first part. Right. As soon as they get there, Villefort is like, what the heck are we doing out here? Like, I know this house. This house used to belong to my mother and father-in-law. There are bad things that happened in this house. What are we doing here? And the Count's like, oh, you like my country estate? Blah, blah, blah. And then Madame Danglars is also like, whoa, what are we doing out here? And then this is the scene where you learn that the mother of the illegitimate child is Danglars' wife. Because she's had all these affairs. Right. And one of them was Villefort. Right. So the Count is, I don't know if he knew that in advance with Danglars' wife, but he definitely knows it after this scene.
Yeah, now he found out.
He sets up this whole thing where, like, so he didn't change the room where the baby was delivered. He, like, changes the whole house to make it look, like, really beautiful, except for he doesn't change the room where the baby was delivered, and he doesn't change the back garden where the baby was buried. Right. Or supposedly buried. So then he goes on this thing where he's like, oh yeah, I got this weird energy from these rooms. Do you believe in like hauntings of like negative events from the past? And Danglars and Villefort are both like, they can't handle it. They're sweating. Like, yeah, they're sweating bullets. And then so he takes them out back and then shows them the garden and is like, oh, you know, I get the same feeling here. And then like Madame Villefort is like, she's the younger stepmother kind of thing. Yeah. She has no idea what's going on out here, but she's like, oh yeah, I can definitely feel something. And like, they're all kind of playing along with it, but like, except for the two who actually knew what happened there, and they're like dying. Oh, and also this is definitely the part where you find out that Andrea Cavalcante is Benedetto, because the servant who told the whole story, he's the one who points out to the Count, he's like, that's the man who I stabbed. I thought he was dead, like pointing at Villefort. And he's like, and that's the woman who delivered the baby, pointing at Danglars. And he's like, and that's Benedetto himself. That's the baby. And then the Count's like, okay, don't say anything to any of them. Get out of here.
Leave.
So that's how that goes down. And Danglars is... So Villefort and Danglars are like, okay, we need to have a meeting. And then they're also like, I think Villefort is the one like questioning the Count, being like, okay, nothing actually happened here. How do you know? You have no proof. And then the Count is like, oh, well, actually, I unearthed a baby skeleton in the thing, which means that somebody buried a newborn alive. And then they're like, why would they bury him alive? He's like, well, if he was dead, they would take him to a cemetery. And I'm like, I don't know if that logic tracks.
That doesn't quite track, but...
All right.
You
do you. So they say this, and then Villefort and Danglars make plans to meet the next day, and then they all leave. And the Count is like, ooh, that's interesting. Andrea Cavalcante, as he's leaving, he's kind of accosted by a random homeless-looking dude. I thought it was the Count in a different disguise.
Just quick scene change or costume change.
Every time a new character pops up in this book, I'm like, is that the Count? I think this is the Count. But then he introduces himself as Caderousse, who was the Count's old friend. He was the drunken guy, who like he was part of the plan, but he didn't do anything, and he was too drunk to really object.
Right.
And he's also like the one who was living on the side of the road, and he's the one who took Benedetto in after everything happened or whatever.
Right.
So anyway, so Caderousse shows up, and he's like makes Benedetto promise, like, I'm going to expose you unless you give me money. Benedetto's like, fine, I'm going to give you money every month. Nothing's happened with that yet, so I'm kind of interested to see where that leads. But while at the party, Monsieur Danglars, he is just smitten with this weird Italian general and his handsome young son. And he kind of wants to marry into this family because he wants to marry into Italian wealth.
Wait, Monsieur Danglars?
Yeah, so that is the husband of the woman who had the affair, and he's the father of the girl who was supposed to marry Albert.
Right.
So he wants...
to marry the Italian general?
He wants his son to marry, or he wants his daughter to marry the son.
The way you phrased it the first time, you made it sound like he wanted to marry the Italian guy, and I'm like, I don't think they did that back then, though.
He basically does.
Yeah.
Like, he wants to marry into the family for the wealth.
I was going to say that was really progressive for the time, if that was the case, but okay.
No, there was no... there's no same-sex marriage at this point.
Yeah, I figured, which is why I was like, that seems kind of off. But, all right.
Yeah, and he's married too. But yeah, so he tries to marry his daughter. Or no, he wants to. And that hasn't come to fruition yet either. But basically, the Count's setting it up so that he wants to marry his daughter into to basically give up a good match to marry a horrible match.
Right.
So Danglars has her... Oh, so then Lady Danglars goes to meet with Villefort the next day. And then they discuss what happens. Villefort says, after I recovered from my wounds from getting stabbed, I went back to see if there was a body there because I didn't want my attacker to come back and find it. So he dug up the entire garden and couldn't find the body, which means he knows the Count is lying.
Okay.
So then they have this talk. Lady Danglars is just like totally lost. She doesn't know what to do. She's very messed up from this, and at the same time, when she goes to meet with her lover, with Lucien Debray, that's when her husband shows up and is like, okay, time for him to leave. And then she's like, how dare you tell me what to do? And then Danglars is just like such a dick to her, and up to this point he is like very submissive and gives into all her demands, and is like clearly like he doesn't care as long as it doesn't cost him money.
Right.
But she gave him the bad information, which made him lost all the money. So then he doesn't care anymore, and he's just a huge dick. Right. And is like basically threatening her that if she loses him more money, she's out. And also that she has to pay him back for all the money he lost. Oh. Because it's her fault that he lost it.
Right. All right.
So there's some marriage strife settling in there. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else really important that happens. I guess when Mercedes returns from she went south for the fresh air or whatever.
Right.
That's like such a thing in old books.
Had
to go south or had to go to the sea for the air.
For their health, for the sea air.
Yeah. So when she returns, they decide to have a big ball in the middle of summer, and they want the Count there. The Count is like kind of nervous, but they make him promise to come. he shows up, and while he's there, it's really like a big meeting between him and Mercedes, and there's like, they share an awkward moment or two. She notices that he's not taking any food, and then she's like, it's kind of insulting that he's not eating at this party that she's throwing.
Yeah.
So then she wants to test it, so she like takes him by the arm and takes him outside to this greenhouse where there's like fresh fruit growing, and he's like, oh, madame, I could never eat a Muscat grape or something. He says this like a few times, and he like has these weird excuses, and but he's just like, he's not ready to face Mercedes at all.
Yeah.
And they just like, the exchange they have is basically like, he says, oh, I'm your friend, but she knows that I don't think she knows who he is, but she like very suspects something.
Yeah.
And he's like not ready to handle it, and she's also like, I think she kind of ascertains that he wants to kill her husband, but like not outright, like it's very subtle or very hinted at.
Right.
But she kind of figures out that there's some hatred between them. I can't remember if anything else important that happens at the party. Oh yeah, there's one important thing. Villefort shows up to look for his daughter because her grandparents on the other side of the family have just died. Or the grandpa died and the grandma's on like death's door kind of thing.
Right.
So these are the parents of his first wife who died a long time ago.
Okay, yep.
Because this is the first daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And oh yeah, sorry, I should go through the whole subplot of Morel and Valentine and Franz, because that's like this whole part of the book.
Okay.
So Morel loves Valentine. Valentine loves Morel. Her father has picked out Franz for her to marry. She doesn't want to marry Franz, but she's a wimp and a coward and won't say a thing about it. Valentine annoys me a lot during this book. She is one of the worst characters in my opinion, because half the time she's crying, and then anytime she could say anything useful, she stands there silently. And it's just like, come on.
Great.
So she doesn't want to get married. Her grandfather Noirtier doesn't want her marrying Franz either. He says that if she marries Franz, he's cutting her out of the will entirely. The stepmom also hates Valentine because Valentine's getting all the inheritance from two rich sides of the family that her son will get none of. Because she's not connected to the Saint Marans in any way. Like, right. That's the mom side.
Right.
And because the grandfather loves Valentine and hates Edward because Edward's a little crap. All right.
He's a little crap. Yep.
I was going to say little turd, and then in my mind it just said crap is better. Okay. So she doesn't get married to the little crap Edward.
Okay.
So then the stepmom hates Valentine, or like at least wants to see Valentine completely disinherited, because then that way her son will get the money. Noirtier says, I will disinherit Valentine if she marries Franz, but the Mr. Villefort does not like being like overruled by his father.
Right.
So he's like, fine, she's going to marry him anyway, and she's just not going to get your half of the money. She'll still get her mom's side's money. Morel is like heartbroken by this. They both think that the Saint Marans, like the mother's side, is going to be the key to like fixing the situation. But when Madame Saint Maran shows up after her husband was just died, he just died of like old age. I think he has a stroke or something. Okay. After he died, then she's like, I need to see Valentine married right away so that I can give her blessing, since her mother's dead and her grandfather is dead. Like, I need to give her my blessing. So then she wants to have the marriage right away. And then Valentine, instead of saying, oh, but I love somebody else, or oh, but I don't love Franz, or anything at all, she just says, okay, and then goes and cries. And then Morel's like, okay, well, listen, I've got a plan. All you need to do is tell your dad you don't want to marry Franz. She's like, I could never go against my father's wishes. He says, fine, here's what you need to do. You need to run away with me. We'll get eloped. We'll come back and get your grandfather, and he can live with us. And she's like, I could never do that. That's impossible. And then he's like, fine, you marry Franz, and I'm going to kill myself.
Oh.
Yeah, he goes extreme with it pretty quick.
That escalated very quickly.
And then she's like, well, I don't want that either. She's like, I guess I would rather die of shame than die of grief. So I'm abandon my family and elope with you. And he's like, that's cool. So their plan is, on the night when she's supposed to sign the marriage contract with Franz, she's supposed to say no and run out of there, and then she'll meet up with Morel outside, and then they'll run off together.
Right.
He waits for her at the time when they're supposed to get married. It's like 9 o'clock at night for whatever reason. I don't know if that was common or if it was just like they were trying to rush the wedding.
Right.
He waits outside. She doesn't show. The church bell rings like 10 o'clock at night. He gets nervous, so he decides he's going to sneak into the Villefort house to see if he can find her.
Right.
He climbs over the garden wall. When he's in the grounds, he hears Villefort talking to the doctor. And I don't know, but I feel like the doctor might be one of the Count's identities.
Okay.
I have a feeling.
Okay.
Or else, I don't know. But yeah, anyway, so the doctor's saying, hey, listen, so the Countess Saint Maran might have died from natural causes, but I've known her for a long time. She was very healthy. She was only in her early 60s. I believe her symptoms point more towards poisoning than to death. Or poisoning rather than death. No.
She's still alive, but she's poisoned.
Poisoning rather than natural causes.
Natural causes, okay.
That's what I meant to say.
Alright.
I totally forgot how to speak words today.
It's one of those days.
Hey, email us with how many times I've misspoke during this podcast, and you'll get blocked. No. Okay, so he hears them talking. The doctor says he thinks it's poison. Villefort's like, but we can't have the scandal in this house. Besides, she has no enemies here. And then he's like, well, do you think the poison might have been meant for somebody else? Do you think it might have been meant for Noirtier? And then they're like, well, I don't see how it could happen, blah, blah, blah. So that's that. I was hoping that this storyline would get resolved before we started this podcast.
Yeah.
But it does not.
Oh.
So.
I mean, it does sound like that doctor is the Count.
It's very Count.
The poison sounds like something he's been setting up.
Yeah.
So.
That's why, and that's the big reason why I think so.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that they have that conversation. Morel like sneaks into the house and he does find Valentine. Oh yeah, at first Morel thinks Valentine's the one who died.
Oh.
And he's like, it says he doesn't breathe for 10 minutes until he hears that Valentine is safe. I'm sure it's an exaggeration.
That seems like an exaggeration, yes.
But he's very worried. He finds Valentine. She's heartbroken. Her grandmother's just died. He and her, they have a little talk, and then while they're talking in the house, the father, like Villefort, has locked up all the gates to the outside of the house, and like is going to bed. And then they're like, oh, what are we going to do? I'm trapped in here, blah, blah, blah. And then she's like, well, there's a way to escape through my grandfather's quarters. You can go there. And so they go to Noirtier. Morel meets Noirtier. They have like a good talk. Noirtier gives them the blessing and says, I'm going to help you marry Valentine and not Franz. So that's how that section kind of ends. Then we go to Villefort's trying to speed up the wedding again. And he's like, well, right before the lady Saint Maran died, he made us promise that we'd get Valentine married. And so Franz is like, all right, well, I guess this is kind of weird, but I guess we can do this. Before it can happen, though, Noirtier calls Franz in and wants to have a word with him. Franz, Valentine, and Villefort all head up to Noirtier's quarters because he's paralyzed, so he can't leave his quarters. He then makes Franz read this note that was in a thing, and the note is like minutes from a meeting of the Jacobin Society. It's like the guys who are supporting Napoleon.
Right.
And basically, the whole note is just a big long story about how somebody ended up murdering Franz's father. And then at the end, Franz is like, you have to tell me, you know who it was. Who was it? And then the way they ask Noirtier questions is they like, let's say a letter. They'll be like A, B, C, D, E, F. And then when they get to the right letter, he'll blink. So they do that, and then he gets to M. And then eventually he spells out myself. I'm the one who killed him. And I was really hoping this would be like the way they wrap up this whole Morel-Franz love triangle. And so I was trying to read through this whole chapter, trying to get to the end of it for this episode. And then it ends with Franz is like despairs and like leaves the room. Then the next chapter starts up with Andrea Cavalcante. I'm like, come on.
Okay.
So, yeah, it kind of leaves on like a very unresolved note for all of the subplots in this chapter.
Well, this is like the bridge towards the end of the book, right?
Yeah.
Because the book's almost over.
Yeah, like, well, it's still 350 pages.
Well, it's 75% of the way done.
Yeah.
You're in the climax now. You're getting to the climax.
Yeah, and like, you see like all the setups are starting, like, Dunglar's already lost a ton of money.
Yeah.
His wife has already been exposed as having a bunch of affairs.
Yeah.
They have this whole Via4 love triangle thing set up. They have sorry, not love triangle, but the Via4's son, bastard son, set up.
Mm-hmm.
They have like Morsurf. You only know a little bit about him, but I know from my first reading, I remember he's the last one that gets it. But like, you know that he's betrayed the Greek general or whatever. Yeah, there's not too much else you know about him, but I'm certain something will happen in that story.
Yeah. All the pieces are falling into place, and now it's just gotta explode all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. And I really was hoping that I would be able to finish this whole thing up before this episode, so that way I could like present the subplots in like
consequential order.
Well, yeah, and then be like, okay, so here's this subplot and this subplot, and then the next episode, here's the remaining subplots.
Right.
But because this book is so long and, you know, it's so hard to fit in 600 pages of reading in a week while also like working full time and stuff, it just didn't happen, folks.
Yeah, next week, maybe.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah, so I guess we're a little bit over.
A little bit.
Danny, where can people find us?
People can find us on Facebook, Literary AF. You can find us on Twitter, LiteraryAFPod. You can listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and YouTube, Literary AF. And you can send us an email, literaryafpod@gmail.com.
Yeah, and thanks for listening. Hit us up, and we'll...
We're doing Sundays now, right?
Well, that's the plan.
Okay.
I don't think we need to set a formal date.
Well, we're trying for Sundays.
Because
everything's up in the air right now. And I'm probably going to be starting a new job in the next couple weeks, so we'll have to see where that is sitting. But, yeah.
Great. All right, well, thanks for listening, and hey, you out there, you listening right now, you keep on reading.